Hello everyone and welcome back to the course. In the last lesson we have created here manually a couple of observables of derived state from the store observable. We're going to introduce from the beginning a better way of obtaining slices of state from the store. We're going to be introducing Ngrx selectors. So what is an Ngrx selector? A selector is simply a function, which is going to be very similar to this one, that takes as input some state on the store and generates as output a slice or a subset of that state. So in that sense, it's very similar to a mapping function as we see here, but it solves an important problem that we haven't faced yet at this point. We are going to be doing this calculation of derived state in an optimized way. If we keep getting back from the store the exact same authentication state that has not changed since last time, then we are always computing the exact same result, in this case the logged in flag. If this function of calculating a derived state would be much larger than this one, then that could potentially cause a performance problem because new versions of the state are going to be emitted by the store all the time, not only when we do login and logout, but with any other action of the application. We want this function to be triggered only if there is really something new to calculate, so we are going to have it memorize the calculations that it did the last few times. That is known in functional programming as memoization. So let's go ahead and see how can we define this mapping function with memory. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create here a new auth.selectors.ts file that we're going to add here to our authentication feature module. Inside it, we are going to start by defining a simple selector. This selector is going to be called select authentication state. And like the name implies, it's going to be a function that takes a sole argument the complete state of the store, and it's going to get back as the result of this function the authentication object. So this is known as a feature selector because it's selecting one of the subtrees of state of the complete store application state. Now, using this feature selector as our starting point, let's go ahead and define here a mapping function, a selector that is going to calculate here the logged in state itself. So we are going to switch back to our selectors file and we're going to define here a new selector. We are going to call it isLoggedIn. And we want this function to have memory. We want it to be a pure function that remembers calculations that it did before. So in order to create this memoized function, we are going to be using this utility here from Ngrx, which is the create selector function. This function takes as the first input arguments other selectors. So we can pass it in here the first selector that we have created, select authentication state. If we would have here other selectors, we could pass them here. The last argument of this function call is not a selector function. This is what we call a projector function. This is a function that is going to take all the outputs of all the selectors that we are defining here on this list, and it's going to get us the result of isLoggedIn itself. So in this case, we are only passing in here one selector, so we are only going to get here one argument, which is going to be the output of this selector, which is going to be the authentication state. Now the output is going to be the result of isLoggedIn. So as we know, this is going to be the logged in flag that is available inside the authentication state. And with this, we have defined our first selector function. This function that we have here, isLoggedIn, is going to take as an input the complete store state, and it's going to give us as output a boolean that says if the user is logged in or not. Let's now give another example. Let's go ahead and define our second selector. We are going to call it isLoggedOut. This selector is going to be derived from the isLoggedIn selector. So it's our initial example of how to combine selectors together. As usual, we are going to pass in here a list of selectors. In this case, we are going to be passing only one element, which is going to be the isLoggedIn selector. And here we are going to be defining our projector function. The projector function is going to take as first argument the output of the first selector. So this is going to be a Boolean flag. We are going to call it logged in. And the output is going to be the output of the isLoggedOut selector. So in this case, we are negating the result of this selector. We are going to be providing here the logged out state. And with this, we have quickly defined a couple of selector functions that extract a given slice of state from the store. These functions have memory. If they are called with the same input arguments, they are not going to calculate the output again. Instead, they are going to fetch directly the result of the calculation from memory, and they are going to pass it directly without executing any of the selector functions or the projector function. With these two selectors in place, let's go ahead and apply them to our application component. So we won't be using here this mapping function anymore. Instead, to derive the state from the store, we are going to be using the selector. So for that, we have this special Rx.js operator that is available in Ngrx store, which is called the select operator. We're going to import here isLoggedIn, and we're going to see that this select operator here came from the Ngrx store import barrel. This select operator works in a very similar way to the map operator. It's applying isLoggedIn as a mapping function, but it's also eliminating duplicates. This means that while interacting here with the application, if we trigger here some other Ngrx action that does not have an effect in the authentication state, then in that case, that Ngrx action is not going to affect this component, because select is going to filter that out. The user is still logged in, the logged in flag is still set to true, so this observable here isLoggedIn is not going to emit duplicate values of logged in as true. This selector is only going to emit values whenever the value has changed from last time. Let's then go ahead and rewrite also here the logged out observable. We're going to go ahead and clear this mapping function, and we are going to apply here the isLoggedOut selector. And with this in place, our application is now using Ngrx selectors for extracting state from the store. Let's go ahead and try this out. So switching here to a larger window, if we log in our user, we are going to see that the user is again logged in, and we have here the logout button. If we click logout, the user has been logged out just like before. So the state of the store is still being reflected here on the UI just like before. The difference towards our initial implementation is that this is now being done in an optimized way. Calculations of derived state are not being repeated if we are doing the exact same calculation. So isLoggedIn and isLoggedOut, these are pure memoized functions that remember the last few calculations that they did, and the select operator is eliminating duplicates for this observable. So the view will only be affected if the data that it's subscribed to has been modified.